Hello and welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, July 11th, and we have a great show for you today. We have the first of 3 interviews with candidates for the SoBro SoNew 12th Middlesex State Representative District. Today's interview is with Newton City Councilor Bill Humphrey. Next week will be Greg Schwartz. The week after that, Rick Lipoff. The point is, we've got all 3 candidates back to back here on TV. It's a great interview with Bill Humphrey, recorded about a week ago. I want you to stay tuned, but first, I want to share with you the news. The Department of Justice disrupted a Russian propaganda campaign that was spreading disinformation using fake social media accounts. The Kremlin-approved and funded project used AI to impersonate Americans on X, formerly Twitter, posting support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Tessie Prevost died Saturday at the age of 69. Tessie, one of the McDonough 3, integrated New Orleans public schools after Brown v. Board of Education deemed segregation unconstitutional 6 years earlier. Tessie, along with Gail Etienne and Leona Tate, attended McDonough 19 Elementary School for the first time at age 6. Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter trial continues today in Santa Fe. Baldwin has pled not guilty, stating that he did not pull the trigger on the prop gun that killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins in 2021 on the set of the movie Rust. Massachusetts will face some after effects of Hurricane Beryl. Meteorologists expect near 100-degree weather, followed by an increased chance of scattered rain and thunderstorms. This Monday, a giant blue whale was spotted off the coast of Massachusetts in a rare back-to-back sighting. Blue whales are listed as endangered and protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The proposed Uber-Lyft ballot question for this November is no longer. The companies reached a settlement wherein drivers remain independent contractors, gain a pay increase of $32.50 an hour for time spent completing a ride, and will receive sick leave, accident insurance, and health plans. Brookline schools will change how young students are taught to read. The public schools of Brookline's district literacy leadership team is shifting to a science of reading pedagogy. Prior to this change, students were taught to rely on context clues and guessing strategies when coming across unknown words. In partnership with the town, the MBTA created dedicated bus lanes on Route 9 near Brookline Village. The dedicated bus lanes will allow MBTA 60, 65, and 66 buses to shave about 5 minutes of travel during rush hour, benefiting thousands of riders each day. Motorists driving in the freshly painted red bus lanes are subject to ticketing. The 6-story 40B project proposed to replace the Citizens Bank at 429 Harvard Street will not go forward as planned. The developer has withdrawn its application and will instead work with the town on a proposal that will comply with the 4-story zoning recently implemented as part of Brookline's efforts to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. Folks, that's all the news for the week. Stay cool, either stay inside, hang out at the library, the senior center, the police station. Be safe out there, be careful, and stay tuned for the next 25 minutes for my interview with Newton City Councilor Bill Humphrey, one of 3 candidates for the 12th Middlesex State Representative seat. We'll see you on the flip side.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
And we're back, and today's guest, as promised, is Bill Humphrey. Bill is a Newton City Councilor and running for the 12th Middlesex District, which is, to a first-order approximation, South Brookline and South Newton. I'm sure Bill will tell us more, but first, Bill, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Representative.
Bill, before we get into the race, we want to know a little bit more about you. So, in a couple of minutes or so, what have you been doing your whole life?
Well, like a lot of millennials, I guess I've had a bit of a portfolio career, but mostly focused around political communications and political activism in some regard or another. One of the jobs that I held for a long time was as an editor at a small magazine that was originally based in DC and then relocated to Germany. I worked remotely again, kind of ahead of the curve for a lot of folks before, in the pre-pandemic era. And got just an enormous number of opportunities there to research and write about and work with, elected officials and leaders on transatlantic policy issues, trade issues, things like that. Kind of getting a good comparison of where we're at here in the United States and in many of the state governments versus the rest of the world, and where we could be doing better to sort of be more aligned with the rest of the global economy on that front. And then more recently, while I've been a city councilor now in my third term, I had been working as a political communications consultant specifically for municipal officials. We've seen that local news media has really dried up and declined in recent years. And I found that the more that I communicated on my own with constituents, the better people understood what was going on and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of elected officials who never really got used to that because they were used to having, a local paper that covered everything and that kind of thing. And then, voters get taken by surprise on stuff. And I think it's better if we can be having a constant dialogue with folks.
And that's part of the value of community media like Brookline Interactive Group hosting shows like this.
Yeah.
We gotta talk one-on-one, or at least, with an email blast or something like that. But also, we really do want to keep engaged in what we'll loosely call traditional media. So you're a city councilor in Newton, and you're looking to put that behind you. Tell us about why this is the time for you to run in the 12th Middlesex district, and remind us with a little more clarity, what is the district? I gave a loose definition.
Yeah, so the 12th Middlesex district includes parts of both Newton and Brookline. Most of it's in Newton, but there's a significant portion of the district that's in Brookline. That area is a lot of the Chestnut Hill areas of Brookline, precincts 14 and 15, as well as sub-precinct 13A, and then precinct 5, but not 5A. Always interesting to see how this stuff gets sliced and diced in the process, which I'm certainly familiar with. I served on the re-precincting committee as vice chair on the Newton side when we were working on that after the census. On the Newton side of the district, it's wards 5, 6, 8, and then precinct 1 of ward 7, which I would say is more or less south of Com Ave. And the whole district I would characterize as being kind of the Route 9 corridor district. It goes pretty much from one end of Route 9 to the other. Across Newton and Brookline, with a couple exceptions. And I think that's the easiest way to think about it. So why am I running for this now? Well, I think there's definitely some interesting and compelling challenges facing Massachusetts that I believe I have a sort of philosophy and worldview that would help on those things. And I know there's a lot of other state representatives that feel similarly and are eager to get to work on that front. If I can be of service in the way that I have been as a ward counselor, but at a higher level and help more people, I think that's the most rewarding thing I can do on a personal level, but it's also an opportunity to get that philosophy out there and articulated. What it boils down to, and it's the slogan of my campaign, is Massachusetts should be a commonwealth for everyone. And I think also, we like to think of ourselves as a national leader in a lot of respects. And it's important that we continue that, whether we have a Democratic administration in Congress or, heaven forbid, a Republican one at the federal level. There's always room to be working on pushing the envelope on some of these issues. And I certainly don't want, California and New York to get all the glory. So I would like to make sure that Massachusetts is really leading the way and setting a good example for other states and showing what you can do if you, are willing to invest in it and work collectively to solve these problems.
Now, you've got a broad portfolio of issues that you're very comfortable talking about. The three that I've noticed seem to play the heaviest are climate, housing, and transit. Let's start with climate. Look, you don't need to convince anyone watching this show that climate change is real, that humans are causing it, and that it's fossil fuels that are the massive exacerbating factor. So what do we do about it?
Yeah, I think, the three issues are certainly closely related to each other and need to all be solved together. But climate change, as you said, is something that there's a broad consensus, especially around here on, and we know that it's kind of hanging over everything else. The question, like you said, is what do we do about it? I think that the governor has put forward an ambitious agenda regarding clean tech innovation and things like that. I'm certainly very supportive of that. I think also most people and companies want to do the right thing here, right? It's a question of, do they have the resources? Do they have the help? Do they have the support? So always making sure that we have the available credits, or in some cases grants if credits aren't appropriate, to be making those energy conversions. We need to have the resources that people can trust as well, to know where to get their information from. Right now, we've got a lot of these, privatized vendors that people have to sort of sort out. Is this legit? Is this a scam? I think that can be really confusing, especially for a lot of our senior population. And I certainly hear that expressed at the doors. There are also some other things that are going to be coming, whether it's, issues of ocean rise or just, inland flooding during severe rain events. We certainly saw a lot of that last summer. And I think that there are things that can be done relatively inexpensively that would have a huge impact on a lot of people's lives. For example, we saw so much flooding last year, especially in the low-lying areas of our two communities. And we know that one of the best things you can do and the least expensive is not to put in, massive new piping infrastructure and things like that, but to simply slow down the flow of the water, just like wetlands and forests traditionally had. If you can have bioswales and other green infrastructure that help temporarily capture and retain some water, along the way, so that it doesn't all arrive at the same place, at the same storm drains and things like that, you can really manage the flooding a lot better. And unfortunately, in the past, some of our forefathers made some poor planning decisions and built in a lot of places that used to be wetlands and built a lot of parking lots. And we're going to have to really reckon with that. Again, I think that there are ways of doing this relatively inexpensively, but that kind of support is going to have to come from the state. Similarly, we know that we're starting to see school cancellation days over heat issues all across the state. And certainly that's happened in this district just in the last couple of weeks. And that kind of thing is going to get more and more expensive and dangerous if we don't address it. But individual municipalities, I think, are going to have a really hard time financially making all of those upgrades simultaneously. That is where the state's going to have to come in. So having some sort of, whether it's grant programs, expanding MSBA, or just having green banking programs that are offering sort of discount or zero interest financing to help communities with this, I think there's a lot to be done at the state level, and I'm really excited to work on those issues.
Yeah, there's as you know, there's so many different knobs and levers to pull. Let's talk about housing, which has garnered tremendous political attention in the last few years after being sort of a sleepy topic. It used to be that housing meant capital A affordable housing, subsidized housing. Now, when we say housing, we mean all kinds of different housing. So how important is this problem relative to other problems? What's the state's role? And if we're going to build a lot more housing, where should this housing be built?
Yeah, well, exactly as you said, this is no longer just a problem of affordable housing. That's certainly a huge problem as well and can't be overlooked, but it really has come down to kind of an all price point situation, which means that the solutions are going to have to be along those lines as well. Now, again, the good news here is if we're working on some of the climate issues in a productive and constructive way, in some cases, literally constructing and rehabbing buildings, that's going to help as well on the housing front. And we can integrate these issues together. We also know that if we're putting housing more toward the already developed urban core areas, that's better environmentally than, clear cutting a forest somewhere else or building on some undeveloped meadowlands somewhere that doesn't have any infrastructure to it. And climate wise, we'd love to get people making shorter commutes into work or wherever it is that they're going. And so concentrating the housing toward where people already live is generally going to be important, which I think goes to part of your question. But the housing crisis at this point has proliferated to virtually every community and corner of the state of Massachusetts. So we know, for example, that on Cape Cod, there's just not enough places to live, and that folks who say work in care homes for adults with intellectual disabilities, don't get paid enough to be able to afford a place on the Cape, but the people paying them and the entities paying them don't have very large budgets, so they can't necessarily raise that income very much. And so it really comes down to a lack of supply. And although there's a massive shortage of affordable units, we also know there's a shortage of market rate units and things like that, which then means that people who've been put on a waiting list for affordable are then paying through the nose to try to get into the market sector. And then they're competing with the folks who are middle income. And then the middle income folks are even sometimes competing with some of the people that would normally be looking for luxury units. So there's a lot that can be done if we're willing to work on all price points and build the housing near where there's already housing, near where there's transit and things like that. That's where we're going to get sort of the highest return on investment, whether it's, our own, public dollars or working in public-private partnerships. There's going to have to be a lot of changes to zoning coming at the state level. There's going to have to be more financing options, whether it's direct financing or more of the fungible tax credits and things like that. And I think that if we're going to close a 200,000 unit gap by 2030, which is what the experts seem to be telling us is necessary to sort of support things, that's going to take a sort of all hands on deck approach. And I think a lot of voters are saying that as long as they feel like it's being done fairly and that it's not being done, one community at a time with no sort of regard of what else is happening in the surrounding communities, they're more willing to get on board with that. We know the effects here already are being felt, not only in how sort of cash strapped people are and really struggling to keep up with the bills, but also that people and then therefore companies are starting to relocate to other states because they need housing that their workers can afford that is relatively close to work. And that's not been an option for a lot of folks here in Massachusetts. So if we don't address this problem, we're definitely going to be really struggling. I think I also hear all the time from seniors as I go door to door, which is something I've been doing for years now, is that they would like to downsize in their community. And there just aren't a lot of good options there, and certainly not ownership options for them. And they're especially reluctant to be renters because they don't want to, lose the wealth that they've managed to build up that they need to, survive on until they pass away. And I think that because they can't leave these large houses that they've sort of gotten trapped in, when they're ready to downsize, then it means that young families also can't move into those houses. So all of these things are interlocking pieces that have a profound effect on each other. And I think we're just not going to be able to, move forward on a lot of our problems without tackling the housing issue. And that's why I am looking at, kind of an all of the above strategy from the state that really addresses a whole bunch of different things and doesn't just try to focus on one particular area.
Are there specific policies either that have been discussed and don't seem likely this session, or sort of things you've got up your sleeve that you'd like to see the legislature push in the coming years with respect to housing?
Certainly one that seems like it's probably not going to happen this term is the affordable housing transfer fee. It's a transfer fee on normal real estate transactions, but it would go into things like the affordable housing trust in each community if the community has one. It's a relatively modest amount. It's really not something that affects your overall price if you're a seller or buyer by very much. I believe the assessors in Newton had told me when we had a presentation that I organized for the Finance Committee on this a few years ago, that the amount that the tax would come to would be essentially equivalent to selling your house 5 or 6 months differently in the calendar than you actually did because the prices are going up so fast. But that turns into quite a significant amount of money, and having that local option where the municipality can decide what's right for them, I think is important. I would certainly like to see it have a lot more flexibility in terms of the thresholds and the percentages that are set, whether it's 0.5% or 2%, whether the threshold is, 500,000 or 2 million. There's different communities are going to have different needs. But, you could generate a pretty significant amount of money, whether it's several $1,000,000 a year in some communities or potentially tens of millions of dollars, depending on where you set that threshold and what your community is. That's a game-changing amount of money for the purposes of planning affordable housing, financing affordable housing, and even just acquiring land when it becomes available that would be prime for those type of projects. I'm really excited about the accessory dwelling units proposal that I think looks like it's moving through at this point in the legislature. We'll see if it makes it through this term. But, that is something that allows a lot of folks to, either bring in extra income or bring in family and have them, have some amount of privacy in their own space, but be able to, live on the property and build that community up. I think that's the direction that a lot of people are probably going to be going in terms of values in the future, especially given the climate situation, is that people are going to be returning to an older model of more multi-generational families. That's certainly something that I grew up with and I'm always going to be promoting to folks. And I think there's also some areas that show some promise, like the social housing pilot that's been proposed, which would be like direct construction and operation of very good quality housing at a range of incomes, and especially for some of the lower income folks. And I think there's a need for additional financing mechanisms as well. A lot of projects lately have been stalled because of the change in federal interest rates. And I think that if we have a policy goal of getting more housing done, it's appropriate sometimes for the state to step in with discounted financing and things like that. So there's definitely a lot of options on the table. And as I mentioned earlier, I think zoning reform from the state level is going to continue to be a huge part of that conversation. I don't know where we're going to land on that, but that's going to be a part of the conversation, as well as any sort of housing stability measures to keep people who already have a home in their home more easily, because that helps with sort of larger outcomes as well.
So you've touched on it a little bit, but I want to shine a little more light. Sidewalks, bike lanes, roadways, light rail, heavy rail, maybe even an airport or two. Let's talk transportation.
Sure.
Where is the issue management? Where is it money? And if we're going to spend the money, where is the money best spent?
Yeah. Well, my dad was a career public transit planner for the state of Massachusetts. It's certainly something that I heard a lot about growing up. We used to take all our family trips around the US to visit other public transit systems and see what they were doing. I think we're in good hands right now on the management front. Philip Eng is, somebody that is coming at this from a professional expertise standpoint as opposed to a political appointee standpoint, which has always been one of the challenges I think we've had here in Massachusetts. So I'm really encouraged on that front, which means that a lot of it is going to come down to resources for things like the T especially. We can talk in a second about some of the other forms of transportation that you mentioned, but I think that in this particular district, the T is the one that's on people's minds the most. And, I think we've got about 10 Green Line stops that are either in or just outside of the district. And it comes down to resources for hiring personnel so that you're not canceling bus trips and train trips or having to run shorter trains. That's expensive and it's draining the resources of the savings and so forth. You need to have ongoing operational maintenance year over year. You need to catch up on deferred maintenance. All of that takes money. And then there are clearly some debt issues as well in terms of how the debt has been structured previously. And I think it's critically important that whatever ends up being done to get out of that debt situation and get that more manageable, that it's not done through the process of service cutbacks. I think the more that you worsen service and cut back service, the less sort of political buy-in there is from the public to be able to make the improvements that are necessary to keep things going. And if the system falls apart completely, it has devastating economic consequences, but it also means huge amounts of congestion. And I know people don't want that, right? So it's, even if you don't use the system, you want it to be working for the people who do use the system, that's for sure. And I think that when it comes to resources on that scale, it requires some amount of political will, right? You have to make the case to the public about that, what is the vision here? What is this going to do? Is this actually going to work if we put this amount of investment into it? And where do we get the revenues for that in a fair and equitable way? Because obviously there are people in some parts of the state with no access to public transit, not even a regional transit authority, and they may be wondering, well, what am I paying for? And some of that is making a case to them about sort of the generalized knock-on effects, but some of it is like, hey, can we figure out a way of raising revenues that is localized to these things? Certainly, should we be thinking about having assessments around the transit stations related to the MBTA Communities Act, where we've rezoned in a way that creates a lot of new value potentially? Maybe that's a source for investing in some of these lines. I think you also asked rightly about other forms of transportation as well. Certainly, there was a debate that we had earlier in this campaign where we talked about the gas tax issue. And as there's more conversion to electric vehicles, and that was a major revenue source for maintaining our highways and things like that, how are we paying for that? And I think that's going to be an important debate that certainly hasn't been settled yet. I know there's all kinds of proposals that have been floated over the years at the House of Representatives about what do we do about this situation. And again, I think that's the thing, is it comes down to a political question, and having a dialogue with the voters, with our business community and so forth, and saying, look, if this is something that we all need and we all benefit from, and if the wheels are going to come off of everything else by not fixing these things, who's willing to chip in to actually pay for this stuff, right? And I think that's certainly going to be important. I tend to favor rail, to your earlier question. I'm not an airports fan. I think that's, from a climate standpoint, going to be heading in the wrong direction. And I think that the highway system, while obviously, indispensable at this point in the way we've set up our society here in Massachusetts, I'm always a little wary of how much money seems to get thrown into quite expensive highway projects with relatively minimal benefits relative to what you might be able to get by investing in, whether it's heavy rail or light rail and things like that, or even bus networks, within the urban core and things like that. You can get a lot of people moved much more efficiently and effectively if you're willing to invest in those type of, rail infrastructure projects. And whether it's just improving them or whether it's actually expanding service, like the recent Green Line extension, that's more important to my mind than, expanding the highways or doing an add a lane here and there and things like that, which is what usually gets done.
So we've actually just got a few minutes left. Time flies when we're having fun.
Sure.
You must have a website. You've got some pitches. Hit us with the short, good stuff now.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I would encourage folks to check out billhumphrey.org. I've got quite a detailed platform and bio there. I'm looking for your support in any way that you can give it. I'm looking for your vote if you live in the district. I think there are a lot of issues that are going to require our attention, so I'm hoping that people will remain engaged in the process and advocate for their particular issues. And I've personally been knocking on well over 5,000 doors myself at this point, just to be able to talk to as many folks as possible. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to talk with all of you between now and the September 3rd Democratic primary in the 12th Middlesex District.
Bill nailed it. The primary is Tuesday, September 3rd. That's the state primary. So we're thinking things like legislative races, governor's council races, county races, at least for those of us in Brookline who have county government. And that's the scoop. So folks, as you know, when campaigns are coming, when elections are coming, I try to bring all the candidates on. I will do just that for the 12th Middlesex. Bill, thank you so much for coming on today. And folks out in TV land or even on the internet, thank you for tuning in to TV on TV only on Brookline Interactive Group. We'll see you next time.